Don't look guilty, even when you're innocent. That was the first thing Elijah Carter learned in law school. The second, being black meant innocence was never assumed. The courtroom was too quiet for a Friday morning in Manhattan criminal court. The kind of silence that sticks to your skin like sweat. Elijah stood at the defendant's table, not behind it as usual, but in front of it, wrists cuffed, flanked by two court officers who once nodded politely when he walked the halls. Now, they avoided eye contact. So did the judge, especially the judge. Judge Ronald Beckett, white, mid-60s, wore his robe like armor and spoke like the Constitution had been written just for men like him. Elijah had argued 5 cases in Beckett's courtroom, won 3. 2 of those wins had embarrassed the judge and record. This morning, Beckett wouldn't even say Elijah's name aloud, just the defendant. Elijah's public defender, a wiry guy with a receding hairline and a chipped tooth, leaned toward him and whispered, "They're charging you with obstruction, tampering, and perjury. You sure you want to plead not guilty?" Elijah turned his head slowly. "I'm innocent." The defender gave a half-smile that said, "So is every other brother I've seen in those cuffs." Then he nodded and turned to the judge. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The room didn't gasp, but it shifted. People sat up straighter. Journalists scribbled. Judge Beckett lifted one eyebrow, but said nothing. Outside, the sky was the color of old denim. Rain threatened, but hadn't committed yet. Elijah's mother, Viola Carter, stood waiting. Her gray wool coat swallowed her thin frame. She wore no makeup, but her presence calm, stern, unblinking made people move out of her way. A retired civil rights lawyer turned advocate, she had been fighting this war long before Elijah had passed the bar. She didn't say anything when she saw her son in cuffs. Just studied his face like a battlefield, reading damage. "It's Beckett," Elijah said, barely moving his lips. "He's setting me up." She nodded once, as if she'd already known. "He's been after you since you beat him in the Singleton case," she said, eyes narrowed. "And now he has a motive, and probably a few co-conspirators." Back in 2023, Elijah had defended a black teenager accused of assaulting a white cop. The case was flimsy. Beckett had tried to suppress key body cam footage, but Elijah fought it and won. The footage cleared the kid. It also revealed misconduct by 2 NYPD officers, one of whom was Beckett's godson. Since then, every motion Elijah filed in Beckett's court mysteriously got denied. Now this. The evidence was a collection of supposedly altered documents submitted in a case Elijah had worked on. The prosecution claimed he'd forged timestamps and deleted entries. Elijah knew it was planted. But in New York, knowing was never enough. Proving it? That was the Everest. That night, the news ran wild with the story. Young black attorney accused of legal fraud. The anchor said, tone neutral, like she was reading a recipe. The footage they showed was from 2 years ago. Elijah in a hoodie, not a suit. Viola threw her phone across the couch. "I'm calling Jerome," she said. Jerome Akers. Civil rights bulldog. Sharp tongue, sharper suits. He owed Viola favors. Several. 3 days later, he joined Elijah's defense team. By then, Elijah had already been suspended from the bar, pending investigation. His firm dropped him. Friends stopped calling. His face was everywhere, his reputation nowhere. But the smear campaign had flaws. One document they claimed he altered was actually submitted by paralegal staff after he'd gone on vacation. Another bore a signature that wasn't his, but the prosecution argued that didn't matter because intent was unclear. "Intent," Jerome said, pacing across Viola's living room. "They're going to use that word like a noose." Elijah stared at the wall. "They don't want the truth. They want a headline." "Then give them one," Viola said. The real break came from an unexpected place. A young black intern named Mariah, who used to work in Beckett's chambers, reached out to Jerome, anonymously. She didn't want to go public, not yet. But she had files copies of internal memos showing that Beckett had flagged Elijah's name months before any alleged misconduct. A file labeled Watch List, notes about problematic counsel, and worse, emails suggesting coordination with the district attorney's office. That's not just bias, Jerome said, mouth dry. That's a Fing conspiracy. But none of it was admissible. Not unless Mariah testified. She's scared, Jerome told Viola. Viola nodded slowly. So we make her less scared. That night, Viola sat down with Mariah at a diner in Harlem. She didn't pressure her, just told her stories. About the cases she lost. The cops who called her bitch to her face. The judge who once whispered to her co-counsel. Let her speak watch her hang herself with her own mouth. Then she told her about Elijah. His first mock trial. How he couldn't sleep the night before the bar exam. How he ran home with tears in his eyes the day Beckett tried to humiliate him in court. You have a choice, Mariah, Viola said, voice even. You can be another silent footnote. Or you can be the reason a corrupt man finally pays. Mariah testified. The courtroom held its breath as she read the emails aloud. She looked like she might crumble, but her voice never broke. Judge Beckett tried to strike her testimony. The motion was denied. The case turned. More people came forward. A janitor at the courthouse remembered shredding files for Beckett late at night. A retired clerk admitted she once altered a schedule on the judge's orders. The threads unraveled fast. By the end of the month, the charges against Elijah were dropped. Beckett was placed under investigation, and Elijah, though cleared, was still unemployed and bruised. But then something happened that no one, not even Viola, expected. The president nominated a new attorney general, Viola Carter, the first black woman in history to hold the office. Reporters swarmed the courthouse when she walked in, flanked by Secret Service. She didn't stop for cameras, didn't pose. But when she reached the courtroom steps, she looked up at the pillars, then back at her son who was now standing where he belonged. By her side, the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. was colder than it looked on television. Long marbled hallways, echoing footsteps, and a constant, invisible hum of history and politics. Viola Carter adjusted her blazer and scanned the room where her first press conference as Attorney General would be held. Cameras were already being set up. Flags were in place. And behind the podium stood the seal of the United States. She had earned this every inch of it with scars that didn't show on the surface. Elijah stood quietly in the back, out of frame, out of attention. He wasn't ready to be seen, not yet. Though the charges had been dropped, the stain lingered. Potential employers ghosted him. Former colleagues treated him like a risk. New York's legal world had already moved on, gossiping about who would replace Beckett, never acknowledging the rot that had allowed him to operate for so long. Are you ready? Viola asked him quietly, her eyes searching his. I'm still angry, he admitted. Good, she said. Anger builds fires, and fires light torches. Just don't let it consume the house. She walked to the podium with the weight of the past behind her and the eyes of the nation in front. She didn't begin with pleasantries. No jokes. No warm-up. I'm not here to heal, she said, voice clear. I'm here to prosecute, to investigate, to rip out the systemic bias that has strangled our justice system for decades. The room froze. This is not about my son, she continued. This is about every son, every daughter, every young black professional who has walked into a courtroom and been presumed less capable, less credible, less human. Behind her, Elijah lowered his eyes. Something about hearing her speak in that room made it all real, made the suffering feel like part of something bigger. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave it a name, a place, a direction. Back in New York, the media turned their attention toward Judge Beckett's disciplinary hearing. It wasn't a criminal trial at Least not yet, but it drew crowds anyway. Protesters lined the steps of the courthouse. Some held signs with Elijah's photo. Others listed the names of defendants who'd suffered under Beckett's biased rulings. Inside, the judge was composed, pale hands folded, thin lips tight. He didn't deny his actions instead. His lawyer argued procedural loopholes, painted Mariah as a disgruntled ex-intern, and suggested that Elijah had exaggerated the damage. But something had changed. The room wasn't his anymore. Every witness chipped away at the myth of his impartiality. The janitor who remembered shredded files. The paralegal who confessed she'd altered timestamps under pressure. A defense attorney who admitted she'd stopped taking cases in Beckett's court because black clients never stood a chance. Then came the final audio leak from a private conversation between Beckett and another judge, caught on a wire during a separate corruption investigation. His voice was unmistakable. That Carter boy thinks he's some kind of hero. A hotshot with a chip on his shoulder. I swear, they let one of them win a case, and suddenly they think they own the courtroom. That clip went viral within hours. Beckett resigned in disgrace. But the Carter family didn't celebrate. Viola knew better than to mistake a fallen man for a victory. Systemic rut didn't end with one name I'd hit in policy, in budgets, and appointments. Still, for Elijah, it was the beginning of healing. He returned to Harlem, walked the streets with his hoodie on, earbuds in, sat on stoops where older men nodded at him now with something close to respect. They knew he had survived something invisible to many, but all too familiar to them. One day, as he waited for a subway, a teenager approached him. "You the dude they locked up?" the boy asked, not unkindly. Elijah blinked. "I guess I am." The kid hesitated. "You still a lawyer?" Elijah paused, then said, "Yeah, I will be again." The boy nodded. "Good. My cousin's getting railroaded. Maybe one day you can help." It wasn't a job offer. It wasn't validation. But it was something real, something human. Elijah returned to work 6 weeks later, not at a firm, but at a legal aid nonprofit in the Bronx. They couldn't pay him much, didn't have glossy offices or fancy clients, but they had people who needed him. The first case he took was a housing dispute. A single mother being evicted illegally by a landlord exploiting rent law loopholes. It wasn't glamorous, but when he stood in front of a different judge, one who looked him in the eye, who asked real questions, Elijah felt something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Meanwhile, Viola had begun reshaping the Department of Justice with a scalpel and a hammer. She launched a division focused entirely on judicial bias and misconduct. Not just race, but all biases. Her first report uncovered 23 judges with documented histories of discriminatory rulings. 2 had cases reopened. 1 was indicted. She didn't stop there. She fought to change the confirmation process for federal judges, pushing for bias training, community oversight panels, and data transparency. It wasn't easy. Senate hearings turned into war zones. News anchors called her militant, but she didn't flinch. At night, she called Elijah. They didn't talk about politics. They talked about cases, strategy, books, sometimes about the silence that comes after battle. "You proud of me?" Elijah asked her once, half joking. She paused. "I was proud the day you cried after losing your first case. Because you cared. Pride isn't about how loud you win. It's about how honest you stay." They both went quiet. Outside their windows, hundreds of miles apart, sirens hummed. Cars moved, and people survived. One morning, a letter arrived at Elijah's office. No return address. Just a folded piece of notebook paper inside, scribbled in pen. "I watch your case on the news. I never thought lawyers like you existed. Now I want to be one. M." He smiled, folded it gently, put it in his drawer next to the bar card he was reapplying for. He'll be back, not just for himself, but for every name that never made the news. Elijah's reinstatement to the New York bar was quiet. No cameras, no applause, just a man and a documented email from the State Bar Committee reading, "Your license to practice has been restored effective immediately." It was clinical, almost antiseptic, but when Elijah saw it, sitting alone in the cluttered break room of the Bronx Legal Aid office, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for nearly a year. He pressed his fingers to the screen, as if touching the words might make them more real. The journey back into the courtroom wasn't triumphant. It was humbling. He didn't return to private practice or a swanky firm on the Upper West Side. Instead, he doubled down on what mattered: housing rights, juvenile defense, wage theft. He stood beside people who never dreamed they could afford a lawyer, who didn't know how to say "Your Honor" without trembling. And each time he walked up to the bench, wearing the same navy blue suit that still held the faint scent of stale courtroom air, he felt something different than before. Not bitterness, not anger. A kind of quiet rage tempered by purpose. A fuel. The media had long since moved on. New York was full of stories: murders, politics, celebrity trials, and no one cared about the young black lawyer who had once stared down a biased judge and lived to tell it. But Elijah didn't need them anymore. What he had now was trust. Word traveled in neighborhoods faster than any newspaper. Clients came not because they saw his face on the news, but because someone's cousin said, "That man won't treat you like you're guilty." He saw things differently now. He listened harder. When his clients told him their stories, he didn't just hear facts, he heard patterns, echoes of himself in their words. Like the 17-year-old boy arrested for stealing diapers from a pharmacy, or the undocumented woman who cleaned office buildings all night and was owed 6 months back pay, or the father who'd missed a court date because his ankle monitor malfunctioned and lost custody of his child as a result. These were not just cases, they were lives caught in gears too large, too careless. And every time Elijah stepped in, he felt like he was pushing against a system designed not to crush all at once, but to wear people down slowly, one denied motion at a time. Meanwhile, Viola was making waves in Washington. She'd become a lightning rod, praised by progressives, attacked by pundits, loathed by a legal establishment that had grown fat on routine. A viral video circulated from a Senate Judiciary hearing where she calmly dismantled a senator's attempt to question her loyalty. "I do not serve a party," she said. "I serve the Constitution, but I also serve truth. And if truth makes some people uncomfortable, that says more about them than it does about me." There was applause in the chamber, not from the senators, from the public gallery above. Her approval ratings fluctuated, but her results didn't. Under her leadership, the DOJ overturned 17 wrongful convictions, opened investigations into discriminatory traffic stops in 5 major cities, and funded programs that offered free legal aid to underserved communities nationwide. And yet, the threats came. Anonymous letters, online hate, even bomb threats. She never flinched. Elijah asked her once, "Does it ever scare you?" She replied, "I've been scared since you were born, son. Every day you left the house. Every time you walked past a cop car. But I do this because I refuse to let fear write our story." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. That fall, something unexpected happened. One of Elijah's clients, a teenage girl named Zariah, was being railroaded for resisting arrest after an officer had slammed her against a locker at school. The body cam footage malfunctioned, and the school's security tapes had gone missing. The prosecution offered a plea: 2 years probation, no jail, but a record that would follow her forever. Zariah didn't want to plead. "I didn't do anything," she said, eyes burning with shame and rage. "If I take the deal, that means I did." Elijah stared at her across the chipped table in the interview room. Something in her voice brought him back to himself in that courtroom. Cuffed, silent, told to admit guilt for the sake of convenience. So he made a choice. He filed a federal civil rights complaint. Then he called in a favor from his mother. Viola didn't hesitate. She couldn't get directly involved, but she could send eyes. Federal eyes. She ordered a full investigation into the school district and the local police department's practices. Within a week, the missing security tapes reappeared. The footage showed the officer initiating the assault. Zariah had only raised her arms to protect herself. Case dismissed. Elijah found her outside the courthouse, standing beneath the slanted shadow of a city bus. She didn't smile. She looked tired, but her record was clean. "Thank you," she said, then added, "My mom says I should think about law school." "You should," he replied. "I don't want to be a lawyer," she said. "I want to be a judge." He laughed. Not at her, at the audacity, the kind that saves nations. "Then be one," he said. "Just don't forget what this felt like." Winter came to New York fast. The air bit harder than usual. The subways grew quieter. But Elijah moved with confidence again. His reinstatement had come and gone, and now he was speaking at law schools, mentoring youth programs, and writing a book about his experience, not to sell it, but to document it. For the ones who'd come next. One cold Thursday, as he stood outside the courthouse waiting for a cab, a man approached him. White, late 50s, cashmere coat, familiar. "Elijah Carter," he said, extending a hand. Elijah didn't take it, just raised an eyebrow. The man dropped his hand. "I'm Mitchell Gantz. Used to clerk for Judge Beckett. Back in the 90s. Elijah stayed silent. "I came to say I'm sorry," the man said. "We knew, all of us, but we were scared to lose our careers." Elijah blinked once. "And now I'm retired. Doesn't cost me anything to speak." Elijah's voice was calm. "Then why are you here?" Gantz hesitated. "Because you won. And I think you should know you didn't just take him down. You made others look in the mirror, even if they don't admit it." Elijah said nothing. The man turned to leave, but paused. "If you ever want to be a judge, I know people. Good people. I know people too," Elijah replied. "I work for them every day." The man gave a faint smile and walked away. That night, Elijah sat with his mother in her D.C. apartment. They didn't talk much, just shared takeout and a bottle of wine. The city lights outside flickered in rhythm with their thoughts. "You think it's ever going to get better?" he asked. She chewed slowly, then said, "It already has. Just not everywhere yet." He nodded. She added, "But don't wait for the world to change. Change your corner of it. That's how movements begin." He thought of Zariah, of intern Mariah, of the janitor who testified, of the teenage boy on the subway platform. His corner was getting bigger, and somewhere out there, another biased judge was watching, wondering if the next young black lawyer might also rise. And this time, maybe not survive it, or maybe burn the whole thing down and build something better in its place. Spring in Harlem came like a cautious promise. Sunlight edged the corners of brownstone buildings, and kids played on stoops again. The cold no longer bit, just tapped gently on its way out. For Elijah, this season felt different. Not triumphant, not victorious, just clear. A clarity hard-won, sharpened by betrayal, salvaged by love. He sat in the back of a church on Lenox Avenue on a Saturday morning, dressed in gray, listening to a eulogy. It wasn't for a family member or friend. It was for Mariah. The young intern who had exposed Judge Beckett's corruption had died in a car crash 2 weeks prior. A truck driver under the influence. No foul play, the NYPD said. Just tragedy. But Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that her sacrifice hadn't been honored enough. No headlines. No national moment. Just a passing footnote. She was brave, said the pastor. She told the truth when it would have been easier to walk away. Elijah's hands curled tightly in his lap. Mariah had changed the course of his life, and he couldn't thank her now. After the service, he approached her mother outside. "I wish I could have done more for her," Elijah said. Her mother shook her head. You don't understand, do you? Elijah looked confused. She believed in you, Mr. Carter, the woman said. She said you reminded her that justice didn't have to mean silence, that the law could still mean something if people like you didn't give up. He swallowed hard. His voice caught. She did more than I ever could. No, her mother said gently. She just lit a match. You're the one holding the torch. Later that month, Elijah received an invitation. It came in the form of a discreet manila envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a letter from the governor of New York. Dear Mr. Carter, in light of your contributions to judicial reform and your continued work in the public interest, I am pleased to offer you a nomination to the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct. The commission, the very board responsible for investigating judicial misconduct, the same board that had once ignored complaints about Beckett. He sat alone with the letter for hours. The thought of accepting it twisted something in his chest. He called his mother. What if I'm not ready? He asked. Viola laughed, not cruelly, just knowingly. You weren't ready the first time you stepped into a courtroom. You weren't ready when they cuffed you. You weren't ready when they tried to bury you. But you stood. You learned. And you came back. That's a don't waste my tax dollars. Elijah joined the commission that spring. At the first meeting, he sat across from judges, clerks, legal veterans, many of whom didn't know what to make of him. A young black lawyer from Harlem, a former defendant, a public defender, not a prosecutor. But he came prepared, and he spoke. He spoke not from theory, but from the scars of the system, each word deliberate, pointed, undeniable. When a proposal arose to raise the threshold for reviewing judicial complaints, Elijah shut it down with a single sentence. People die when we wait for patterns instead of believing survivors. The room went still. One older member, a retired appellate judge, nodded and said, he's right. Change began not in sweeping declarations, but in footnotes, in memos, in amendments that closed loopholes, shortened review periods, increased transparency. It was slow, painful, but real. Meanwhile, Viola's time in office was nearing its end. Rumors swirled about her being nominated to the Supreme Court, or retiring to teach, or founding a think tank. She said nothing. Elijah met her one evening in D.C. on a quiet walk along the Potomac. I think I'm done, she told him. He looked over at her. With what? With the fire. With fighting every second. You think it's over? No, but I think someone else can carry it now. He didn't ask who. She handed him a folded sheet of paper. A speech. Her resignation announcement. He opened it, skimmed a few lines, and stopped when he reached. I leave this office knowing that justice is not a title, but a torch. And the next generation has already picked it up. He looked at her. That's a bit much. She raised an eyebrow. You think I'm naming you? Aren't you? I'm naming everyone who's ever been told to wait for justice. But yes, mostly you. They stood in silence, watching the lights on the water. Back in New York, Elijah's office grew busier. He brought on a new attorney, Zariah, now in law school, working part-time. Another intern, a paralegal from the Bronx. No marble walls, no glass doors. Just hard chairs, harder cases, and heart. The final case Elijah took that summer was the most personal. A black teenager, 16, charged with assaulting an off-duty cop who had allegedly provoked him outside a bodega. The officer claimed the boy attacked first. Witnesses said the opposite. The security footage? Lost. It was Beckett all over again. Elijah didn't just defend the boy, had dismantled the prosecution. He subpoenaed police communication logs, had cell tower data pulled, and proved the officer had lied about his whereabouts. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Not guilty. Outside, the teen's mother wept. Elijah handed her a tissue. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You don't have to, he replied. Just raise him to know he matters. She nodded. He already does. Because of people like you. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Elijah stood at the courthouse steps, the same place where he'd once been cuffed, humiliated, nearly broken. Now he stood tall, a man who had faced the system, not just survived, but reshaped it. Not alone, never alone, but with every soul who had risked something. Mariah, Viola, Zariah, Jerome, strangers who chose to care. Justice hadn't come cleanly. It had come in scars, sweat, sacrifice. But it had come, and Elijah Carter was not done yet. He adjusted his tie, stepped down the marble stairs, and walked back into the city, not seeking peace, but offering resistance. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. Not to punish, but to protect. Because justice, in his hands, was no longer a hope. It was a weapon, and he knew how to wield it. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.